This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Qatar Airways' dream came true. After a 3.5-year blockade, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt will finally allow flights to Qatar and overflight rights for Qatar-registered aircraft. Considering that Qatar Airways lost $1.9 billion in their last financial year, largely due to the blockade, this was more than welcome news. But why should you care about the blockade ending? Because it will have major implications for global flight prices and competition. Now, the blockade ending would always have been welcome news, of course, but it happened during an especially convenient time for Qatar Airways. Here's why. This is part 2 of my videos on the ending of the Qatar blockade. If you haven't already watched the first one for essential background information, it will be linked in the description or in a card right now. During the 3.5-year blockade, Middle Eastern aviation went through a lot of changes. At the start of the blockade, the so-called ME3, Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways, was at its peak. The three airlines were expanding and not so worried about profitability, although Emirates and Qatar Airways claimed to be profitable through this period. For reasons I've covered in my video titled What Happened to Etihad Airways, Etihad became a more silent player and slowly receded to become primarily an airline for people traveling to or from Abu Dhabi. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's national carrier Saudia had quite the transformation. They were rebranded with a vastly improved onboard product, and one of their main hubs in Jeddah saw its new terminal open, designed to increase its capacity from 13 to 80 million passengers per year. The airline also offered insanely low premium fares between Southern Europe and Muslim countries in Southeast Asia, positioning itself as an important player in Malaysia and Indonesia. Elsewhere, Oman Air, who was contending to become a major connector too, revised its growth strategy as well. Despite the opening of a stunning new airport in Muscat, the airline, which intended to become the boutique Middle Eastern connector, has slowed its growth to focus mainly on profitable routes that can be served by 737s out of Muscat. They even partnered with newly launched low-cost Omani competitor Salam Air in a move that solidifies their role in bringing people to and from Oman and the Indian subcontinent. But still, the two remaining large Middle Eastern airlines are Emirates and Qatar Airways. Emirates had a more limited network than Qatar Airways but offered more capacity in many markets thanks to its A380s. In 2019, Qatar Airways carried 32 million passengers while Emirates carried almost double that, 59 million. Anecdotally, I found that Qatar Airways has had far lower fares and load factors out of Europe than Emirates, suggesting that Emirates has been most successful in optimizing not only its European network but also its marketing. But the main reason perhaps is the change in strategy that Qatar Airways had to employ following the blockade. They launched many routes to secondary cities in Europe between 2017 and 2019 in order to put their fleet to use and bolster connectivity through Doha. When launching new routes, it takes a few years for airlines to gain traction and market recognition, so many of these flights would not have achieved their maximum load factor by the time the pandemic hit. Of course, attractive pricing is a way to appeal to new customers, whether on a new route or to steal them from competitors, so that explains their lower prices. Under Qatar Airways' new normal, they achieved an industry-high aircraft utilization. A network planner at the airline told me the average wide-body aircraft in their fleet was flying 16 hours per day pre-pandemic, compared to 8 to 10 hours at most legacy airlines. They found missions for every single aircraft, without much wiggle room for additional traffic in the schedule. For years, Qatar Airways was flying more than they could technically budget with their number of aircraft. So in normal times, what would have happened if and when the blockade ended? Previously, Qatar Airways offered 500,000 seats per year to 10 cities across the blockade countries, with Dubai being served by up to 21 flights daily. Obviously, any service resumption would be gradual. Qatar Airways would need to see how many locals in the blockading countries are willing to fly with them after the years of bad blood, and the same goes for carriers like Emirates or Saudia relaunching flights to Doha. Without any travel restrictions, let's just look at the required fleet to resume their Dubai services. The scheduled flight time from Dubai to Doha is around 1 hour. Let's assume the average turnaround time would be 1 hour and 15 minutes in both Doha and Dubai. This means an aircraft serving this route would require 2 hours of flight time and 2.5 hours of turnaround time, for a total minimum of 4.5 hours for one rotation. So the minimum realistic number of rotations an aircraft could do in a day would be 5, requiring 22 hours and 30 minutes without any room for delays. To reach the previous 21 daily flights, this means Qatar Airways would require at least 4 aircraft fully dedicated to this route. That's to Dubai alone. They also need to serve dozens of daily flights to other major destinations like Dammam, Bahrain, and Abu Dhabi. Given that Qatar Airways operates a network that is heavily banked around connections, many of these destinations will operate in one of 3 departure waves, either between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m., 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., or 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. These 3 bank times mean that Qatar Airways will need to take an aircraft from another route. Even though the flights are short, they cannot squeeze them in between other flights when the aircraft is on the ground. These destinations need their own spot in these key departure times, meaning that each destination served will need an aircraft that would have been flying elsewhere. In normal times, you can see how this would be an issue. If they resumed around 20 destinations, each requiring a departure at, say, 7 p.m., that would require an additional 20 aircraft. That simply wouldn't be possible. Aircraft don't magically appear out of thin air, well, unless it's a really foggy morning with a low cloud ceiling, but I don't think that's how aircraft deliveries work, right? Instead, Boeing and Airbus require massive lead times, which would entail a slower return to previous capacity levels, simply due to fleet constraints. But wait, Dan, what about the other airlines in the region? Surely this has implications for them too. Why am I not bringing up Emirates or Saudi here? It's quite simple. Doha is one destination for them. They used to operate around half a dozen daily flights, which could be handled by a single aircraft. Clearly, this is vastly different from the implications for Qatar Airways having 20% of their network return overnight. However, the impact on demand for their flights is another matter, more on that shortly. Can you see why COVID-19 is a blessing for Qatar Airways in this specific situation now? Sure, in the beginning of the blockade, Qatar Airways had a lot of aircraft they didn't know what to do anything with. But over the years, they've slowly found missions through new routes to secondary cities for all these aircraft. Had the blockade ended in normal times, they simply wouldn't have had enough aircraft to relaunch all the flights and frequencies that they would have wanted to. Thanks to the pandemic, Qatar Airways is in the same position as most airlines around the world, where they have an excess of aircraft, meaning that they can relaunch as many flights as they want to without being held back by their fleet. This is compounded by the fact that Qatar Airways is operating far fewer frequencies to most of their destinations at the moment. Prior to the pandemic, Qatar Airways offered 10 daily flights to Kuwait City, their highest frequency destination and most important remaining link to the Gulf. Today, they offer 2 daily flights. As we've seen since the blockade ended, the resumptions have been mainly to the biggest cities in each country, with a maximum of 2 daily flights, just like to Kuwait. I'm not saying they would have necessarily restarted service with more than 2 daily flights had the blockade ended in normal times, not in a pandemic, but the subtle nature of these resumptions is very different from normal times. There's no flashy Q-Suite shuttle to Dubai, there's no A380 or all business class service like Emirates and Qatar offered before the blockade respectively. This is all, for political reasons, extremely low-key, and that is good news. Why is this good news? Because it allows for natural, demand-driven service increases. After all, even without the resumption of these routes, the biggest win for Qatar Airways right now is the ability to return to Saudi and Emirati airspace. So the end of the blockade aligns perfectly as vaccines are distributed around the world and international travel, hopefully within the coming 12 to 18 months, can slowly return to 2017 levels, which is when the blockade began. At that point, Qatar Airways is saving massive amounts of money by avoiding unnecessary detours due to airspace restrictions. And they're back in many of their pre-blockade markets, ready to bite when the demand is there. For now, they have plenty of free aircraft to resume a few daily flights due to the pandemic, something that they wouldn't have had before. Now let's look at how this impacts the other airlines in the region and how it impacts the people living in these countries. Firstly, how will this impact Emirates, Etihad, and Saudia? Extremely negatively. After all, Qatar Airways used to operate the equivalent of 16 A380s every day to Dubai. Think about all those passengers who were originating or ending their journey in Dubai who were forced to fly other airlines when the blockade started. Undoubtedly, Qatar Airways will bring intense price competition to Emirates, and every other carrier serving Dubai will eventually feel the impacts of this. The same goes for Saudi Arabia. However, for the people living in Saudi Arabia or the UAE, the implications of this might not be much more than the ability to fly Qatar Airways easily once again. Competition is especially intense to the UAE, so I don't think prices will drop much further. However, the people who get the biggest win from this are the people of Qatar, and in a smaller sense, this means a loss for Qatar Airways. Given that the market for travel to and from Qatar isn't huge, the national airline has had a monopoly on most flights to and from the country, leading to outrageously high prices. These weren't necessarily a problem for Qataris, but they made travel prohibitively expensive for many foreign workers who, after all, make up the vast majority of Qatar's population. There is no doubt that the return of Emirates, Fly Dubai, Saudia, and Egypt Air will drastically lower prices for people flying to and from Doha. Just looking at new routes, the home airlines significantly undercut Qatar Airways on price already. But as I mentioned earlier, Doha is just one market. The true winners here are still Qatar Airways due to the network-wide implications, while the other airlines in the region will surely see a huge increase in competition on flights to their hometowns. So let me end this video with a question for you. Regardless of where you live, what implications do you think the blockade ending will have on you? Without research, can you estimate whether the result will be positive or negative for your hometown and your home airline? Because this doesn't only affect the Middle East. If nothing else, we can all look forward to even lower flight prices in the Middle East going forward. And if I'm correct, the pandemic is a blessing in disguise, allowing Qatar Airways to return gradually, feasibly, and take its time to create the perfect network of Middle Eastern connections by the time the travel world recovers. Today's video is sponsored by the always awesome Skillshare, whose mission is to help you guys gain real-world skills in a fun and convenient way. Skillshare offers thousands of classes on almost any topic you can imagine, helping you get started on that new project. The best part is that there are millions of other creatives learning on Skillshare as well, so you can compare class projects, get advice, read reviews, and more, all for less than $10 per month with an annual membership. I'm trying to learn some basic animation at the moment, so I really recommend the class Create Then Animate, Beginner Workflow in Illustrator and After Effects by Megan Freiseth. If you want to try this class or any other class on dozens of other topics, you can try Skillshare Premium for free if you're one of the first 1,000 people to tap the link at the top of the description.